whether knowingly or unknowingly, I say, many pastors have actually contained an application in the form of replacement theology borrowed from the Matthew passages. And again, it's not done really out of in a kind of a mean temper or a hurtful way, or even an openly boastful or prideful way. So I'm not terribly harsh on pastors when I have conversations about that. I just have to be aware that it's there. And typically, if I get a chance to dialogue with pastors, like in real like face to face or even via email, then I'll say, have you ever considered the way that theology impacts Jewish people? And they might say, well, there's very little we can do about it. It's God's program. I mean, if the Jewish people can't deal with it, then they need to take up their complaint with God himself. And I say, but there are different ways of interpreting the passage, which I will get to in my commentary, which I think don't have to spell the end of the Mosaic Law. And really, in the end, folks, we're not talking about just a difference of interpretation. We're actually talking about a difference in seeing that there are other passages in the Tanakh, prophetic passages, that can't really support the idea that the law of Moses has been done away with. So it's not just that I am offended because I'm Jewish, and therefore I think you should change your sermon, oh Mr. Pastor, because you're offending me and my Jewish ears. No. It's more than that. It's that replacement theology has been rotten to the core from the beginning because it disagrees with what the prophets promised. So we'll get to that in time, all right? So I continue by saying, in an effort to gain a well-balanced sample from prevailing Christian views, what I decided to do when I wrote my commentary is I decided to jump online and query a popular Christian question and answer website. And here is their question and their answer reproduced in its entirety, since it is quite short. So this is GotQuestions.org, and here's the question and here's their answer. And so the question, first of all, says, what is the meaning of the parables of fasting at the wedding feast, the old cloth, and the wineskin? And I think what I will do first is, if they don't say it, then give me a moment. I'm going to go back and back up into my own commentary, and I'm going to quote the scripture from Matthew. Since that's the way I've got my commentary put together, so bear with me. So let's read the parable, or the anecdote, or the statement of Yeshua. Starting at verse 14 of Matthew chapter 9, here's what Yeshua says. Then the disciples of John, let me highlight all of that so you can see, there we go. Then the disciples of John came to him, asking, why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Verse 15, and Jesus said to them, the attendants of the bridegroom cannot mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them, can they? But the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. Now, pause right away and notice that Yeshua overlaps the meaning of fasting with mourning. Right? The question is, why do we and the Pharisees fast? The verb is fast. But in verse 15, Yeshua says, the attendants of the bridegroom cannot mourn, right? So he interjects the word mourn there, and then later on the verse he says, in his answer he says, but the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will, he doesn't say the word mourn there, then he says the word fast. So by overlapping the word fast and mourn, we instantly see that by Yeshua's day, fasting and mourning had become conflated concepts, right? Overlapping ideas. What do we say? They were concepts that were mixed in with one another, even though the Torah didn't really say that mourning and fasting should be put together, right? When you fast doesn't mean you have to mourn, doesn't mean you're mourning, but by the first century, this become the kind of the tradition. There's nothing really inherently wrong with that, but Yeshua uses this opportunity to begin to remind them that he himself, as the long-awaited Messiah of Israel's prophetic promises, he represents the coming of a time of joy into Israel's history, a time where promises are going to be fulfilled and sin is going to be dealt with atonement is going to be offered up. All right, even if many of the things that Yeshua said were cryptic, nevertheless, it doesn't change the reality of the fact that he is the very one that God promised he would send to Israel. He says in verse 16, "But no one puts a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch pulls away from the garment, and a worse tear results." Right? Again, a lesson from real life that was more relevant to them than it is for us today, right? These days, if your clothes are worn out, most people don't patch them. They simply just throw them away or hand them down to the younger brother or sibling, or give them away to the Goodwill or whatnot, or just toss them out and they go out and buy new clothes. But back in this day, you didn't really do that so frequently. You went and started patching things. And so Yeshua gives an example there. And then in verse 17, he says, "Nor," right? So it's right on the heels of the clothing example, which means it's meant to be understood in the same kind of example or the same theme or the same lesson. "Nor do people put new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise," and again, back then, speaks to a modern or an everyday example that people would have been able to easily follow. "Otherwise, the wineskins burst and the wine pours out and the wineskins are ruined, but they put new wine into fresh wineskins." It's this last sentence that, this last example about the wineskins, this is the one that really he drives it home for most Christian evangelicals when it comes to the replacement. They put new wine into fresh wineskins and both are preserved. And so, as we're going to see from GotQuestions.org, they're really drawing their interpretation from the last two examples, the patch and the wineskin. Sorry. So that having been said, we read the verse. Let's drop back down to GotQuestions.org and begin to read their answer.